A boy without a family grew up and won a throne. As king, he led armies with firmness, defeating opponents without mercy and leaving destruction wherever he went. His power was incomparable. But one day, everything changed. His life came to an end, and an unknown voice told him of a new journey. It was time to seek the light in another existence. Thus, he was reborn, now as a baby, in front of a new couple who watched him with affection. Curious, the former king mentally asked himself who those people were. Soon, the man smiled and introduced himself as Reynolds, while the woman, visibly moved, said her name was Alice. They happily announced that this baby would be named Arthur. Upon hearing the name, he understood that he had truly left his previous life behind and started another. It was strange to think that, after so many achievements, he was now there, so fragile and small. Despite this, the way Reynolds and Alice cared for him rang true. Arthur realized that they both believed, with certainty, that he really was his son. Of course, this was expected, but still, within his crib, there was unrest. He felt afraid. His little fingers, almost instinctively, held his father's finger, who smiled tenderly at the gesture. For Arthur, however, it was nothing more than an involuntary reflex. Soon, his new reality imposed limits on him. Trapped in a body he could barely control, he ended up getting dirty without wanting to. Alice, with admirable patience, cleaned everything delicately. For him, it was a humiliation. Nothing was happening the way he would have chosen, and this feeling of imprisonment in his own body bothered him deeply. Time passed, and, at a certain moment, Arthur saw Reynolds demonstrate something he had never seen before. His father channeled light energy into his hands and effortlessly disintegrated a stone. A piece of the rock, however, ricocheted and hit his head. Alice, noticing, ran to him and used the same kind of power to heal him. Arthur watched in silence, surprised to discover that there were abilities in this world that went beyond anything he had ever known. He thought that was, in a way, impressive. Shortly afterwards, he saw Reynolds face a monstrous boar-like creature. With a single blow, he defeated him. Upon returning home, covered in blood, the man was greeted by Alice and her son. He wanted to come over and hug them, but he hesitated when he looked at the weapon in his hands, still dirty from battle. Arthur, attentive to every detail, concluded that, in that place, carrying weapons was common, which certainly indicated a dangerous environment. Alice, noticing her husband's condition, asked if he was okay. Reynolds confirmed, saying it was a quick task. Soon after, she approached the crib and told her son that it was time to sleep. He began to rock him calmly, while Arthur, despite fighting sleep, reflected. Those days had been full of frustrations, yet there was something comforting about moments like these. In his old life, rest was always interrupted by the threat of death, and here, for the first time, he felt safe enough to sleep without fear. Time passed, and, one day, Arthur started to crawl. His parents watched him with joy, although they also showed some apprehension. He found himself in front of a mirror and, for a moment, stared at his own reflection. Even after so many months, he still couldn't get used to his new body or his new name. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. One quiet afternoon, Alice put him in his crib to sleep. As soon as she left, Arthur saw a chance. Using a blanket, he climbed down from the crib with effort, as he now finally had control over his movements. Step by step, he crept silently, determined to reach a room where there was a book. The reason was simple. He knew that knowledge is a powerful weapon. I wanted to understand that world better before anything else. Leafing through the pages, he discovered that the continent where he was born was called Diden, and was divided into 3 large kingdoms. The first, Darp, was inhabited by dwarves and located underground. The second, Essenwar, was a hidden haven of elves among the forests. The third, Sapin, was where he now lived, the most populous kingdom, made up almost entirely of humans. Just like in his old country, there was also a monarchy there, but with one big difference: the throne was passed on by inheritance and not conquered by force. Arthur continued exploring the books, and when pulling another volume from the shelf, it fell, triggering a sudden memory of his past life. He saw images of a civilization much more advanced than that, where technology was part of everyday life. Returning to the pages of the book, Arthur understood that the key to everything there was magic, or rather, mana, a natural energy that flowed in all beings. Its use could be inherited from parents, but it also appeared spontaneously in one in every 100 people. There were two main ways to manipulate mana, through augmentation and conjuration. The increase allowed the body to be enhanced, granting superhuman strength, agility, and resistance. Conjuration was the use of mana to create external effects, such as casting spells of different types. However, to master this energy, it was necessary to have a nucleus, something that only formed in adolescence, when the body's mana was concentrated in a single point. Everything began to resemble a peculiar energy of that world, known as Kai. It was a force that, when recognized within the body itself, could be manipulated and released. Like magic, Kai depended on a core, a kind of essential center without which nothing would work. Arthur, still very young, tried to explore what was left of his old knowledge. And, to his surprise, he managed to identify a trace of Kai flowing within him. However, the moment of concentration was interrupted when his mother suddenly appeared and took him in her arms. She was watching him with watchful eyes, and Arthur suspected that perhaps she had realized what he had done. I thought she noticed the Kai activation. However, what she said took him in another direction. He commented that something needed to be changed. Arthur immediately denied it, believing that nothing had happened. But when he felt the diaper, he realized the inevitable. Yes, I had done it. A complete defeat. This seemed like a profound humiliation to him, and he reaffirmed to himself that that child's body was a real prison. Time has advanced 2 years. Alice wrote in her diary, describing Arthur as the most adorable baby that ever lived. But there was something that made her uneasy. In all this time, she had never seen him smile. As he wrote, his gaze turned to the window, where he saw Reynolds handing his son a piece of wood to play with as if it were a sword. That bothered her deeply. She reprimanded her husband, remembering that he had barely learned to walk and was already being encouraged to fight. Arthur, upon seeing his father being reprimanded, noticed an interesting dynamic. During his parents' 2 years of marriage, it was Alice who led the household's decisions. This led him to wonder if, in that world, the roles between men and women were reversed. At another time, he was walking around the city with his mother, but his attention was not on the routine details. He was absorbed in gathering information that would help him understand that new world. He carefully observed every aspect of the city, which revealed a lot about its structure and functioning. When they passed by a weapons store, he examined each piece, drawing conclusions about the technological level of that kingdom. A little further on, he noticed a stall selling jewelry that he had never seen before, not even in his previous life. There, he had an unexpected encounter with a merchant who, in a friendly gesture, showed him some fire magic. This left him completely amazed. During the return home, he reflected on his new existence. I recognized that, despite the limitations and frustrations, it wasn't so bad. His parents provided him with everything he needed. And he wondered, were all families this warm? I did not know. After all, in his previous life, he was an orphan, abandoned by his parents from an early age. As he fell asleep, his mother gently carried him to his crib. She said, in a low voice, as if speaking to herself, that she felt happy to see her son showing interest in books. I also noticed their attentive eyes when they walked around the city, a trait clearly inherited from their father. I felt that, one day, he too would want to go out into the world, seeking his own adventure. But for now, she knew she wouldn't be able to contain her little Arthur's curiosity. The days passed. Arthur, from the window, watched his father with admiration. Reynolds was an enhancer, someone who skillfully manipulated energy. Having someone like him around made Arthur feel lucky. He was a living example, a model to follow. Alice, upon noticing her son's interest, asked him to pay close attention to what his father was doing. He watched as Reynolds gathered his power to the core and made an impressive display of his strength. Arthur was sincerely impressed. He concluded that he couldn't waste time. But when he was about to practice, his mother carried him in her arms, saying it was time to rest. With small gestures, he tried to show that he wanted to read. Initially, she refused. Upon seeing the boy's expression, he ended up giving in, on the condition that it would only be for a few minutes. Alone, Arthur put the knowledge he accumulated into practice. He began to gather the mana fragments scattered in his body. I knew it required a lot of effort, but I felt like I was about to achieve it. However, the result was catastrophic. A violent explosion took over the house. In the chaos, Reynolds quickly protected Alice. But what worried them most was their son. When they ran to him, they were surprised to discover that Arthur, less than 3 years old, had already formed a nucleus. Before they could react, the debris began to fall, and the two protected it with their own bodies. The scare was immense. When they saw that the boy was okay, they both cried with relief. Arthur, without understanding the reason for the tears, wondered why they reacted like that. After all, they were only fulfilling the role of parents. However, something inexplicable happened. Even though he didn't fully understand, he also began to cry. It was a feeling he had never known in his past life, not even in books. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, a creature shrouded in shadow awoke. Soon after, the narrative takes us to a memory of Arthur's previous life. A trial was underway. A man, despite being an emissary, had conspired against the king, a crime whose penalty, according to the laws of that time, was immediate execution. However, the advice was less severe. They decided that he and his family would be taken back to their country of origin, where they would await the final sentence. They then brought his wife and son. In desperation, the man turned to the king, begging him to spare his family. He declared that the crime was his alone and that the others were not to blame. He accepted the punishment, stating that returning to his country would be worse than death. On his knees, he begged him not to punish them. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. The king ordered the execution of his wife and son. For the council, it was seen as a gesture of mercy. They said King Grey saved them from eternal suffering. Destroyed inside, the man had no other option but to thank him. Back in the present, Reynolds was handing Arthur a pair of gloves as a gift. But the boy preferred the sword. He thought that with such a small body, he needed a weapon that would allow him to hit the enemy before they were reached. And then they began a friendly duel. Arthur demonstrated natural skill with a sword, which impressed his father. Reynolds congratulated him. But it soon became more serious. He concentrated some of his magic into his staff. Arthur was not left behind. He imitated the gesture, channeling magic into his sword. With a well-aimed blow, he broke his father's staff in half. And then, with a slight smile, he asked what he thought of that. Inside the house, later, Reynolds commented to Alice that Arthur needed a real master. But she disagreed. He recalled that he himself had promised to take care of his son's training. Reynolds admitted that he did, in fact, intend to go that route. However, he recognized that Arthur possessed a rare and impressive gift. Therefore, Alice offered to teach him the basics of magic. Reynolds, however, stressed that the boy's situation was special. He said casually that Arthur had managed to cross a barrier reinforced with mana, and that at just 4 years old. Surprised, Alice began to understand the scenario better. She then hugged him tightly, but still shouted that she didn't agree with that. She couldn't accept the idea of seeing her little Arthur living far away, in a distant city. From that moment on, the couple began to discuss what to do with their son's future. Observing the scene, Arthur concluded that intense emotions could cloud judgment, and that was why he decided to suggest a third way. Why not just leave together? Upon hearing the proposal, his parents exclaimed in unison that he was a true genius. Excitement permeated the atmosphere, and they soon began to prepare their bags. Arthur, noticing his parents' radiant faces, let out a discreet smile. The next morning, a carriage full of adventurers arrived at the house. One of them approached Arthur, saying that they already knew each other, but that he probably didn't remember because he was still very young. However, in his mind, Arthur did remember that group. They were the same ones who were present when he accidentally destroyed the house. They were the Twin Horns, the group to which Reynolds and Alice had belonged. The redhead introduced himself as Adam Crinch, and with him were Angela Rose, Durden Walker, Yasmin Flamesworth, and Helen Shart. During the journey, Arthur reflected on the means of transport, considering it quite rudimentary. Still, there was a certain charm in being there, next to her mother. At a certain point in the journey, they decided to take a break to rest. Arthur took the opportunity to share that the destination was a city called Axorus. Despite natural curiosity, there was a problem to be faced. A pack of wolves appeared, forcing the group of adventurers to prepare for combat. Observing carefully, Arthur noticed that Adam, Helen, and Yasmin were body reinforcement users, while Angela and Durden were spellcasters, and they all moved with mastery. This made him feel the need to one day reach that same level. As night approached, they set up camp right there. As they ate dinner, Alice commented that she was already full, even though she had eaten very little. It was then that she noticed an injury on Reynolds. With that in mind, he tried to cure him. Before that, the other adventurers assured her that the area was safe, authorizing her to use her powers. Arthur, in his thoughts, noted that his mother was a talker-type mage, specializing in healing. Because they are rare, these mages prefer to keep their gifts secret so as not to become easy targets. One of the reasons why she and Reynolds lived in seclusion in the camp was precisely this, to maintain anonymity. After the treatment, Adam commented that he would like to exercise a little before bed and asked Reynolds if he could train with Arthur. As there were no objections, the boy soon found himself in front of Adam. Arthur knew that this would not be a simple training session. He mentally questioned if everyone had forgotten that he was only 4 years old. Even so, he was curious to discover his own limits. Adam channeled mana into his spear. Arthur did the same, but concentrated his energy in his legs, which allowed him to move forward with surprising speed, suddenly appearing on Adam's back, although he lost his balance a little. The fight remained even, until Adam exaggerated and threw Arthur away. Fortunately, the boy already expected this, as his body was quite light. Angela saved him using wind magic, immediately relieving Alice. The other adventurers scolded Adam, wondering if he had forgotten how to control the force. The redhead responded with a mischievous smile, saying that Arthur was a little monster. Back to the boy, he was surprised by Yasmin's approach. She wanted to know how he had used that technique with his legs. Arthur hesitated, but when he looked into the young woman's determined eyes, he knew she wouldn't give up so easily. They continued the journey at a good pace, and during this period, Arthur had several opportunities to learn from his father and the other adventurers. He highlighted how useful the knowledge from his previous life had proven to be, especially with Yasmin, who taught her the technique of strengthening her legs to achieve great speed. The bond between them grew, and one day, upon learning of Arthur's birthday, Yasmin presented him with a special knife, expressing gratitude and, in a way, affection. She noted that the gift also came with a built-in rope. Angela and Helen commented that it was rare for Yasmin to show attachment to someone like that. Something that didn't surprise Alice. She always knew how much her son could captivate people. Amidst the relaxed atmosphere, Adam announced that it was time to move on. Alice went to Arthur to warn him, but as she approached, she felt a sudden discomfort. Arthur noticed and questioned his mother, who disguised it. Soon after leaving, they were surprised by an ambush by bandits. The arrows were fired without warning, but Angela managed to repel the projectiles with her wind magic. The leader of the criminals appeared and ordered them not to harm the woman and child, claiming that they were worth more alive. Then he ordered the attack. The adventurers sprang into action, skillfully protecting the carriage. However, even with the individual advantage of the defenders, Arthur felt that there was something about that confrontation that made him uneasy. The bandits were many, and their strength was reflected in how tired the adventurers were becoming. Amidst the chaos, Reynolds was pushed against a float by the leader of the bandits. Even though he was injured, he got up with effort and, trying to calm the family, said that he wasn't that bad, but that things would get much worse if they discovered Alice's power. Concerned for their safety, Reynolds asked Arthur to get his mother out of there as quickly as possible. The boy, without thinking twice, shouted that he could fight too, that he was already strong enough. But Reynolds, with a serious look, asked him to use his strength to protect his mother. Then it was revealed that they were expecting another child. Arthur was shocked by the news, now understanding better why his mother was so different. With all this, Arthur didn't think twice and, determined, picked up his mother and took her away from danger. Reynolds, despite being injured, made a point of remaining firm, focused on confronting the leader of the bandits. On the way, Helen, Yasmin and Adam protected Arthur and his mother. But as they fled, Arthur couldn't help but think that even though he was someone who had always taken things from others, now he was running away so he wouldn't lose anything. It made him remember the family he had destroyed and think that maybe it was all a kind of karma. Without further warning, one of the bandits took advantage of Arthur's distraction and launched wind magic at him. The boy did not hesitate and placed himself between the attack and his mother. However, as he did so, he was hit and ended up causing his mother to fall off a cliff. In his mind, he screamed that he wouldn't leave without taking that bandit with him. With the knife that Yasmin gave him, he tied the rope to the guy's leg and pulled him towards him. The adventurers tried to save Arthur, but in the end they couldn't. As his last moments passed, the boy reflected on what he was feeling. He knew he hadn't achieved anything, but, strangely, his heart felt full. Finally, he understood what that man had said to him and why people cried that time. It was at that moment that he remembered that he was going to be a big brother, and when he admitted that, he thought that he would have liked to be one. After some time, Arthur woke up in a dark forest, where a huge creature appeared and greeted him, calling his name. Soon after, he found himself in a cave, with that creature in front of him. Her presence was frightening, and Arthur instinctively decided to attack. But the creature, with a simple movement of his finger, sent him flying away. In a soft, feminine voice, she told Arthur that he still had a lot to learn. So, she got up and went in search of some fruit, knowing he was probably hungry. The creature seemed to care about Arthur's well-being, although it was not entirely trustworthy. When he tried to get up, he ended up hurting himself even more, and the creature warned him not to move. She said he was very lucky to have survived, but for now he needed to eat before answering any questions. Arthur, obeying, devoured the fruit offered to him. When he finished, he asked if his parents were okay. The creature, who introduced herself as Sylvia, explained that she could not leave that place, but that she had the ability to see more things than many could imagine. It was then that she showed him that his family was still alive. This relieved Arthur deeply, and he, with tears in his eyes, thanked him, even without knowing the creature's name. Sylvia, smiling softly, said her name was Sylvia. Over time, Arthur started to live with Sylvia. When his wounds healed and he wanted to return home, Sylvia revealed that this would not be possible anytime soon. They were at the edge of the Elsier Forest, a dangerous place full of bandits and wild animals. However, Sylvia knew how to avoid these dangers by creating gaps in space, although this required careful preparation. During this time, Arthur trained with a stick he found there. Sylvia, seeing his dedication, was happy. After all, kids should stay active. At a certain moment, Arthur, thoughtfully, realized that Sylvia had never talked much about herself. He also remembered the times he screamed in fear, but despite her appearance, she was always warm and kind. After a while, Arthur began to meditate, which surprised Sylvia. Upon realizing that the boy already had a monocore, she asked if he knew how to use it. Arthur confirmed, explaining that it was like refilling a fuel tank while flying. Sylvia smiled, saying that humans had a limited view of mana, as they only thought about accumulating and using it. For creatures like her, called mana beasts, this was as natural as breathing. She then asked if Arthur wanted to learn more, and the boy confirmed. Sylvia then asked what he intended to do with the knowledge he gained. When he replied that he would kill anyone who tried to take away what was important to him, Sylvia jabbed him, saying that was the wrong answer. She explained that she would not teach someone who thought that way. Arthur, confused, tried to understand. He always believed that killing enemies was the way to go, after all, so he would become the most powerful of all. Sylvia was not at all satisfied, and the blame was placed in her words when she mentioned that she could easily tear that being apart with her hands, but that, at the same time, she had the ability to treat it with delicate affection. So he asked her a question. What would she prefer? Without hesitation, the protagonist replied that she preferred to caress him. Sylvia agreed, as she thought the same way. She stressed that while anger and hatred can burn quickly, expressing itself as violence, in the end they leave nothing but resentment. Violence may seem good at the time, but it does nothing lasting. So, while caressing the being, she told him that she preferred that he not use the life he had saved on something so negative. Although, at that moment, the boy felt as if that creature knew everything about him. But I knew that was impossible. Sylvia then questioned what he would do with all this power when he was stronger. He responded with the phrase she wanted to hear. He would protect the people he loved. Now this seemed like the perfect answer. Meanwhile, a creature that resembled Sylvia appeared, saying that there was no place she could hide from him. As she flew away, everyone could see how she easily killed a local dragon. In a flashback, Arthur begins to talk about his life in the world before. He reveals that, despite being called king, his title did not have much power, as political authority was in the hands of Parliament. As resources became scarce and the birth rate fell, the king's role was reduced to being a kind of executor of war, a killing machine. With that, an old man approached King Grey and, praising his countless victories, said that he had brought wealth and glory to his people. Then he asked what brought him there that day. But the protagonist ignored him, turning around and saying he was leaving. We return to the present, where Arthur practices Sylvia's teachings to control his mana. He remembers how much he wished he had the power to control Kai so he could continue fighting. After much effort, the protagonist manages to gather his mana, expanding his magical abilities impressively. However, at this moment, Sylvia hits him, pushing him away. Confused, Arthur asks what had happened, but Sylvia doesn't answer, just asks him to remain silent. That's because the creature was approaching, and she told him she could go with him. But the being rejected Sylvia's offer, and, in response, used dark magic, hitting her with a sphere of energy that weakened her. However, he told Arthur not to worry as there was nothing serious. The creature added that if he overdid it, he would shorten the little time he had left to live. Sylvia didn't care about that. Upon destroying her armor, she revealed her true form, a white dragon. And so, a fierce battle between them began, where Sylvia, although she knew she would pay a high price, no longer cared. She was happy with that, but confessed that she would like this happiness to last longer. As the fight continued, the being launched several spheres of dark energy, destroying everything around it. He concentrated all his power into a single point and fired at Sylvia, who couldn't move because Arthur was behind her. At that moment, he used his power to stop time and asked Arthur to come closer. He wanted to know if she looked more like Sylvia now, something the boy confirmed. With that, the being opened a portal, apologizing that the exit wasn't as close as he had hoped, but assuring that everything would be fine, as he had taught the boy how to survive. Before leaving, he asked Arthur once again what he would do with his power. The young man answered confidently, to protect the people he loved. And so, the promise was made. Arthur then noticed a wound on Sylvia, but she asked him not to worry about it. Then, she handed him 2 objects, asking him to wrap the egg in his feather and take good care of it. As he approached, she marked his arms with some mysterious marks. Arthur didn't understand what they were and asked, but Sylvia replied that he would understand at the right time. She then stated that it was time to move on, although it was revealed that she could have sent Arthur home immediately, but didn't want to because she was having too much fun with him. Arthur was frustrated because despite his promise to protect his loved ones, his power now seemed enough to save Sylvia. She tried to calm him down, saying that all this was already foreseen. The promise did not apply. At that moment, Arthur, with tears in his eyes, wondered if what he felt was gratitude for Sylvia or if the time they spent together had changed him. But he knew that now she was his family, whether she was a dragon or a monster. Sylvia, despite everything, told him that she already had a mother. Arthur then made an unusual request, that she be his grandmother. This made her so happy that she asked to be called that, something he accepted with a smile. Then she pushed Arthur towards the portal, making him understand that it was time to leave. Arthur, on the way to the portal, regretted it and asked her to go with him, but the portal closed. Sylvia cancelled her power, allowing the creature's attack to hit her completely. However, the blow was not enough to defeat her. With one last effort, the being used all its energy to create a huge explosion, devastating the place. However, we see two people at the seashore, one telling the other that the rest was now up to them. Back with Arthur, he hears Sylvia's voice, who tells him that although the world is full of pain, that is precisely why they must transform it into happiness. Arthur doubts he can do it, but the dragon assures him that if he can't for now, that's fine. Every step towards this will be a learning experience, and she believes he can achieve this goal as he was the strongest king of all. She then asks him not to let his heart fill with hatred and anger. With these words, she says, "Let the light bathe your new life, King Grey." Arthur wakes up in the forest. Although he was crying, he commits to fulfilling what Sylvia entrusted to him. However, he hears a sound in the bushes. So, he activated his ability and climbed with agility until he reached the top of a tree. The first thing he did was carefully put away the item that Sylvia had entrusted to him. Then he advanced cautiously, and from his high position he saw a group of men surrounding an elf. They had probably captured him. Elves were valuable, after all. It was obvious that they planned to sell it for a considerable sum. This awakened uncomfortable memories in Arthur. Something similar had happened to him and his mother in the past, when they tried to take them to equally cruel ends. The feeling of helplessness grew within him, but Sylvia's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that he could not allow negative emotions to dominate him. For now, he decided to observe and understand the kidnapper's movements. When night fell, a doubt bothered him. Why did the wolves obey with so much docility? Shortly afterwards, the answer emerged: it was magic. Arthur knew he needed to explore this. He threw some objects towards the animals, causing one of the men to approach them to control them. When he did, the boy took advantage of the distraction and left him out of action, perhaps even lifeless. Another man, noticing something strange, investigated but met an even worse fate. Two enemies had fallen. However, Arthur felt the weight of the battle. Her small, fragile body made everything more difficult. Unfortunately, a bald man discovered their presence. Arthur tried to confront him, but was unsuccessful. The guy then warned his partner. The boy was a sorcerer. Seeing a child with such abilities surprised him. It wasn't something common. Soon, it became clear that he intended to capture him, not just out of curiosity, but because children with magic were worth even more than elves on the black market. He was strong, and Arthur couldn't even touch him. The situation got worse when the criminal held him firmly and tried to prevent him from attacking him with fire magic. Now, the criminal no longer wanted to take him. He intended to eliminate him right there. However, Arthur still had some tricks and, with a well-aimed attack, put an end to the threat with a fatal shot to the head. Only the bald man remained. The latter, upon realizing the situation, begged for his life. But Arthur did not forget that the little elf had probably begged too, and yet she was not spared. What happened next was not shown, but anyone who knew the boy from his past life knew very well what he was capable of doing. After the confrontation, Arthur freed the elf, took care of her bandages, and, for some reason, had an unexpected vision, the image of an unknown woman, which left him confused. He explained to the girl that the danger had passed and that she could now return home. The elf, worried, asked about her arm, which was badly injured. Arthur tried to minimize the severity of the injury in a way that a child would understand. After all, to little ones, even scratches seem serious. Thinking back, it was the first time he shared the journey with someone his age. He had always been surrounded by adults. Arthur decided to hide the bodies of the attackers. However, the girl understood what had happened. He asked her not to come any closer, as it was not a scene for children. Her answer was simple and direct. He was a child too. Shortly afterwards, as if it were something banal, she asked what happened to the men. Arthur then took advantage of the girl's innocence to tell a different story. She said they had been in an accident, and that the important thing now was that she was safe. He asked her to take care of herself, but she didn't want him to leave her alone. He explained that he needed to find his family again, and that she should also try to do the same. No one would come looking for her, he said regretfully. The elf, fearful, revealed that her house was in the opposite direction to the one he would go, and that she didn't even know how far away they were. She was just chasing insects when she was captured. These words awakened in Arthur memories of his childhood in the previous life. He couldn't just leave her. He then decided to accompany her. But there was still the problem of wolves. They couldn't leave them there to their fate. The elf suggested releasing them. I was convinced that the people of that territory respected all forms of life. Fortunately, the wolves left peacefully, without showing aggression. Thus, the journey towards the girl's house began. During the walk, under the sun the next day, Arthur asked his name. She introduced herself as Tesha, and he said he was Arthur. He offered him some food. He imagined he was hungry, and even if he wasn't, he believed he should eat something. At the same time, he thought of Sylvia. That sounded exactly like something she would have said. Tesha tasted the meal and grimaced. Arthur explained that it was dried meat with salt, not very tasty, he admitted, but it served the purpose. He had always viewed food as just a necessity, but now he realized that perhaps there was more to it than he realized. Tesha commented that she wanted something sweet, but she still ate the soup without complaining. Arthur understood that he needed to learn from her how to behave like an ordinary child. When she asked what he was doing in the forest, he told her that he had separated from his family, which sparked the girl's interest. To her, that meant he was lost. Arthur wanted to know what life was like in the land of elves. Tesha replied that Elenoir was a place full of joy. As his parents were always busy, he spent his days with his grandparents and caregivers. After a while, the boy climbed a tree to observe the surroundings. He then realized that the journey would be more complicated than he imagined, as there was no sign of Elenoir. Meanwhile, Tesha was surrounded by small animals that she used as markers for her way home. Arthur preferred to keep his distance. As they continued their journey, the girl mentioned that as soon as her magical energy returned, she would train at the teacher's house. Arthur found it curious and wanted to know if there was an organized education system there. Tesha didn't quite understand what he meant. Nearby, he noticed something approaching. It was one of the wolves from before. During the night, the animal did not attack them, which left him intrigued, but also afraid because they were so close. He asked Tesha to rest, saying that he would take care of the surveillance himself. Sitting under the starry sky, Arthur reflected on everything that had happened that day and asked himself, once again, what exactly Sylvia wanted to give him. Despite the darkness that took over the environment, the elf still remained awake. With a suspicious look, he turned to Arthur and questioned whether he really needed rest. The boy assured him that everything was under control, but the elf insisted that he be careful. He said that, from the outside, people with bad intentions could notice that they were just young people, and, therefore, take advantage of the situation. Arthur couldn't completely understand that girl, but she made an unusual request, that he watch her from inside the store, so that the situation itself would force her to give in and seek shelter. The truth is that she was scared, and she needed someone around to make her feel safer. In the middle of the conversation, she asked if he came from the human kingdom. I had heard stories that human men were dishonest and had multiple wives. Arthur, surprised, wanted to know who had said that, and discovered that the person responsible was Tesha's grandfather. He didn't think that view was completely fair after all. Perhaps there were also despicable individuals in the Elven Kingdom, but as he thought about it, he realized that Tesha seemed to understand exactly what she was saying. The girl then began to act unpredictably, as if she had lost interest in the subject, and fell asleep almost instantly. Arthur observed everything, and had the impression that this was more or less what someone who had a younger sister felt. The next morning, after many hours of rest, the two resumed their journey. The boy noticed that Tesha looked so calm next to him that, for a moment, she seemed to have completely forgotten about the men who had captured her. In a way, this confidence bothered him a little, as his intention was still to reunite with his family as soon as possible. However, something inside him began to change. Soon, an intense pain arose in his manicore. Worried, the elf asked if he was okay, but the boy replied that it was nothing serious. Even so, she did not hesitate and immediately set out to look for medicinal herbs that could help him. Even though he tried to resist, the pain only increased, and to make matters worse, a wolf appeared at exactly the worst moment. Fortunately, the animal posed no threat, it just seemed to have come to deliver something. Tesha appeared in time and explained that the wolf was there as a thank you for freeing all her companions. It was, in a way, retribution. In the evening, after a long time, they finally managed to have a decent meal. Tesha said that, although she had not found the herbs, she had obtained nutritious food, traditionally consumed by the women of her village. However, after a while, it became clear that it didn't sit well with Arthur's stomach. As they would say in his country, he had a weak stomach. She apologized, admitting that perhaps the food was too strong for men. Back in the camping tent, Arthur couldn't fall asleep, even though he was very tired. Tesha, on the other hand, seemed full of energy. She began to say that, when she was a child, she always heard stories about the country of humans, about the dwarves, and that since she was little she had wanted to visit all those incredible places. She talked non-stop, as if narrating an exciting game. Meanwhile, Arthur was fighting sleep. Despite his efforts to stay awake, he ended up overcome by tiredness. It was understandable, considering everything he had faced that day. The next morning, as they continued their journey, Arthur was still in pain, but at least it seemed like they were getting closer to their destination. It was then that Tesha asked him if she could call him Friendship Artbelow. He replied yes, of course, as he considered it an honor to accompany the great elf Tesha. It was a provocation, naturally, which the elf didn't like very much. This moment made Arthur reflect on the word friendship, something that, in his previous life, he had never had the chance to fully understand. After some time, Tesha claimed to have seen something ahead. Arthur thought it was just leaves and trees, but then his eyes widened as he realized what was before them. Tesha confirmed they had finally arrived. She asked him to hold her hand so they could enter. Shortly after, they arrived at the Elf Kingdom. However, not everyone who received them showed sympathy. Suddenly, Arthur was grabbed. Desperate, he asked Tesha to explain what was happening, but her expression only increased his uneasiness.